Finally, at the end of July, the United States Census finally contacted me after 8 months of hearing nothing. If not for the census, I would have had to move out of my apartment because there was no way that my roommate could pay for a two-bedroom with the rent increase. Training for the census took place in person, and because we were part of the non response follow up team, we were expected to contact people who were already hesitant to participate in the process. At the same time, Trump was decrying the census and complaining about using federal resources to determine the population. I learned the entire list of questions, but there were so many times that people barely let me get past the first one, so I worked on condensing my questions as quickly as possible. There was overtime and bonuses, and because this was effectively my only job and the only outreach that I was able to have for the community, I took it in stride. One of the best parts about working for a federal agency was that I would have unlimited access to masks and hand sanitizer, and without taking advantage of this, I made sure that I was masked every time. I used a limited amount of sanitizer only because I showered immediately upon entering the house, and I washed my hands all the time. Most of the people who were hesitant to participate were people of color, so I made sure to ask them a condensed version of the survey, which would capture as much information as possible. People are surprisingly receptive to involvement that concludes in under a minute, and I had most of my spots completed by the end of August. An efficient black woman who concludes her business and gets on her way is a lot less threatening than people who insist on completing all the questions, and I knew that exploited people value their spare time, more than anything else. By the way, I had further motivation to be done with my work. Being outside in Texas in August is nearly punishment for being alive, and the main reason I avoided dehydration was because of the hydro pack I wore every day. As the pressure was mounting to end the census before its time, I figured out how to get numbers without necessarily contacting people by contacting the property management companies of apartment complexes. Residential properties were the most difficult because my area was full of private property owners who owned property there but lived somewhere else. Thus, I had to do research to figure out who the property owner was, and that took up the mornings while I did surveys in the afternoon and evenings. Ironically, the most offensive moment took place on the property of a nonprofit. I went to the property and tried to contact the staff, which was mostly people of color who were being overworked. As I was headed out to knock on doors, a white woman left the office and followed me out and proceeded to explain that her staff had no idea how important the census was and that she would do everything possible to make sure I had the information I needed. Having already been scammed for effort by a white woman for that year, I was extremely skeptical, but thanked her, gave her a list of units that I needed information for, and proceeded to go knock on doors. Again, the people were very receptive to shortened surveys, and I had no issues with the overworked staff plowing through a bunch of units until it was time for me to go back to a complex closer to home. Unbeknownst to me, the nonprofit organization owned more than one property, and I ran into that woman at another property. Because she had pretended to collaborate, I approached her as if she meant what she said, and she responded with rage, ran to my boss, and attempted to get me fired. My boss was confused because of my record, and nothing happened other than stress. My response was stupid because I contacted her boss, knowing that white women protected each other against the stupid subhumanity that most of them consider us to be. I simply got to enjoy a day of embarrassment and frustration, and still had to respond to all the places on my list. My supervisor was replaced during September, likely because he had another job, so I got to know a different person when dealing with the last of the census. After knocking on as many doors as possible, there was still work to be done because if people had not responded, one could only conclude that someone other than the owners of the property lived on site. Short-term rentals, such as Airbnb and vacation rental by owner, have no residents per se, but no one can assume that the property is vacant when completing the census. Therefore, I started looking with the Travis County Appraisal District to see who owned the property and tracked it down as best I could. This yielded more, so I explained what I did to my supervisor, who asked me to write it down in an email for distribution to the team. Soon, everyone was both on foot and doing the research, so we got a higher percentage of work done, and although there were no more bonuses, we were able to finish by the October deadline.